is to have a look at the website that the organisation has. So I did that with Eastern Palliative Care. And I have to say that I found the volunteer stories very moving, and it gave me an insight into the types of work you do. So I'm pretty aware of the types of areas that you cover, such as you were talking a moment ago about biographers and transport and pets walking and all of those sorts of things. So it's good for me to know that because it gives me a bit of a context for the presentation, and I try and incorporate that as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully I'll do that successfully. Okay, so you should be seeing a slide now. Would that be right?
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, let me just see if I can adjust this a little bit. Okay. Right, that's a bit bigger. Is that better?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. All right. So I've talked a little bit about that at the beginning. The first thing to say is that I'm not a lawyer. And so this is not legal advice. However, at our service, we do have lawyers. I'll talk about them in a moment. And so if there was more specific information relating to the law that you required, what we would encourage you to do is to contact our telephone helpline. All right, a little bit about our service to start with. As I said at the beginning, we're a free service. We don't means test and we don't assets test. So the only requirement is the age criteria and if the person is at risk or experiencing elder abuse. And we operate a telephone helpline, which runs from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday, and is operating during COVID restrictions as well. So we're still doing casework and everything as usual during COVID. However, obviously what we're not doing is face-to-face consultations. And so most of the consultations will occur over the phone or via webcam through Skype or Zoom. So the telephone number is 1300 368 821. You'll see the telephone number at the bottom of each slide. And what I've sent to Crystal is a copy of the presentation so that you don't have to take copious notes. And I'm taking it that she'll distribute that after this. Is that right, Crystal?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, okay, great. So when someone contacts the telephone helpline, usually one of our social workers will answer the phone. And what they'll do is they'll assess whether the inquiry comes within our brief. And if it does, then what happens is the inquiry might be able to be dealt with in that initial call. However, if it relates directly to elder abuse and it's the older person themselves who are being abused or at risk of abuse calling, then an appointment will be made for them to talk with a lawyer and a social worker together. And that's usually done on a telephone consultation. And it takes about an hour. And during that consultation, what the lawyer and the social worker will be doing will be getting more details from the person as to what the particular circumstance is, and then to talk with them about what some of the options might be to address that. Some of the calls are resolved in that initial consultation. However, about a third of the calls we get about 3,000 calls a year. About a third of the calls we get go through to casework. And what that means is that there are ongoing issues which can't be dealt with in those first two calls, and it requires ongoing casework by the lawyer and the social worker. Sometimes people won't want any legal redress, and that's okay. We can look at ways of addressing the abuse or the mistreatment in a non-legal way. However, the reason the lawyer is involved is if there is something that needs to be done at some stage, working with the older person that requires a legal response, so it might be the redrawing of an enduring power of attorney, then the lawyer has knowledge of the case and the older person isn't required to tell someone different the story over and over again. We do policy and media and obviously education as well. We have a website. The website address is again at the bottom of each slide. And we have a newsletter which comes out quarterly, which keeps people up to date about some of the latest research, some of the activities and events that are occurring through Seniors Rights Victoria, and other information related to responding and elder abuse. All right, I'll just have some water. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to have a look at some context for what we're going to talk about. And the first thing to say is that elder abuse is a form of family violence. So it's recognised under the Victorian Family Violence Act. And so we have a specialised area in which we work, which recognises that abuse and mistreatment of older people can occur for both older men and older women. So that's important to keep in mind. Now, the first thing I'm going to look at in the context is Victoria's population. And when in 2011 and 2016, we conducted a census in Victoria. And in 2011, the total population of people living in Victoria was 5.5 million people. And that increased to 5.9 million people in 2016. What I want to focus on particularly is the number of people over 60 years of age. So what you'll see in 2011 is that 14% of the population in Victoria was over 60 years of age. And what happened in 2016 was there was an increase of 7%. So we're now seeing that 21% of the total population in Victoria is over 60 years of age. And what that means is that 1 in 5 people are over 60 years of age in Victoria. The other thing we know about our older population in Victoria is that about a third of them come from different cultures. So that reflects Australia's migration program after World War II. And so what we're seeing at the moment is that those people who came here during the 50s and 60s are now in retirement age. And so the biggest group of people over 60 years of age in Victoria at the moment from the European mainland are Greeks and Italians. And what we'll see in years to come is that as those numbers decrease, we will see greater numbers of people over 60 years of age from Asian and Southeast Asian countries. The other thing to say is that in 2016, there were about 48,000 people who identified as Aboriginal, and about 4% of them were over 60 years of age. Now, you may be thinking, why is he talking about this data? What I'm trying to demonstrate is that what we're seeing in Australia, and there's been a lot of media about this lately, is we're seeing an increasing aging population, and that's going to continue in years to come. So it's important to keep that in mind in the context of elder abuse, because if we do see an increasing aging population in Australia, and we are going to see that, we're more likely to see more of this. We're more likely to see ageism occurring not just in conversations, but in a whole range of different areas. Now, one of the things I like to do when I'm doing a presentation is show positive images of people aging. And so in this particular slide, what you can see is a man on a skateboard, and his name is Lloyd Kahn. He lives in the United States of America, and he's 83 years of age. And he's been skateboarding since he was 64. So if you think, you've got a bit of time during your retirement years, this might be one of the activities that you take up, right? I try and encourage people to do different things. But the other thing that it demonstrates is that, regardless of our age, we can take up different activities. And it challenges our notions of what aging is like. Because, in society, a lot of people will have the notion that aging and older people are related to being frail, being inactive, having illnesses and diseases, and not seeing it in a very positive way. And that's what causes ageism. Now, Lloyd's story is quite interesting because when he started skateboarding at 64 years of age, he was a bit wobbly and he fell off a lot. And at 66 years of age, he broke his left arm and he went to hospital. And when he went to hospital, the doctor who saw him said to him, listen, Lloyd, if you're going to continue doing this, you need to do it safely, and gave him information about wearing protective gear, patched up his left arm, and off he went. And as you can see in the photo, he's wearing protective gear. Now, what the doctor recognized was that regardless of Lloyd's age, he had the right to choose what he wanted to do in his life. The doctor's obligation in that was to provide him with information about how he could do that safely and avoid injuring himself in the future. Now, some other doctor might have seen Lloyd and said to Lloyd, listen, Lloyd, you're too old for this. You know, this is a teenager activity, because most people would see skateboarding as a teenager activity. And what you need to do is you need to go home and hang your skateboard up, put a rug over your knee, sit in front of the television and drink hot chocolate. Because that's how some people will see older people. What ageism does is it discriminates against older people because of their age. So in Australia at the moment, research indicates that the biggest form of discrimination that occurs for older people is in employment. If a person's over 50 years of age, they are going to be discriminated against because of their age, more so when they're applying for a position, an employment position, than people under 50 years of age. The other thing it does is it devalues older people. So for example, in conversation, this can happen quite easily in families. You know, the comment might be made, well, don't listen to mum or dad or nana or granddad or auntie or uncle, because they're getting really, really old now and they're losing their marbles and they don't know. And, you know, people have a bit of a giggle about that. But what that's saying is that everybody who gets older gets a dementia-related illness. And we know for a fact that in Australia, only a small percentage of people get dementia-related illnesses. And the other thing that it does is it denies the rights of older people to make their own choices and to live independently. And so, you know, in Lloyd's case, what we saw was a doctor who responded and recognised his rights. But in other situations, that might not have been the case. If we're seeing an increasing ageing population in Australia, as we are, then what we're likely to see is more of this. And this is the main reason that elder abuse occurs, because it denies the rights of older people to make their own choices. It begins to take control of their lives. Okay, so the first thing to say before we move into elder abuse is that this doesn't happen in every family. So, you know, in most families, there will be varying degrees of loving and trusting relationships. And there might be conflicts and tensions and what we call in my family, robust discussions. Some people might call them arguments, but they don't lead to people intentionally abusing one another. So what we're talking about here is beyond those everyday family dynamics which occur in families. And we have a particular definition that we use. Elder abuse is any form of mistreatment of an older person or abuse of an older person, usually by someone with whom they have a trusting relationship. And that trusting relationship in most circumstances will be the adult son or the adult daughter. So unlike family violence, typical family violence, where you see that women and children are victims, survivors, and men are usually the perpetrators, what we see in elder abuse is that both older men and older women can be subjected to elder abuse. And the people who are perpetrating it are usually their adult sons or adult daughters in equal proportion. Now, the relationship of trust that we're talking about here doesn't include any consumer transaction or professional association. So, you know, if someone comes along to Seniors Rights Victoria and says, you know, look, I want to make a complaint about my doctor because they're abusing me in some way, that wouldn't come under our brief, because there's a professional association there and there's also a fee being paid. So we don't just say to people, you can't come along, you know, we can't help you. What we would do is give them information where they might be able to seek help. So what we were set up to do about 12 years ago was to work with people, older people who are being abused and mistreated, mainly by family, relatives, or those friends with whom they've had an ongoing and continuing relationship over a number of years. Now, some people ask me, you know, well, can someone who's in an aged care home, for example, telephone our service to talk about being abused by a volunteer or staff member or manager in that aged care home? We don't have the power to deal with that. There is another organisation in Victoria called Elder Rights Advocacy that deals with those particular types of complaints. And the reason they deal with it is because aged care homes come under Commonwealth law. And so it's a different jurisdiction. We're mainly concerned with that law which relates to Victoria. So if someone came along to us with an inquiry along those lines, we would refer them to elder rights advocacy. Now, there are different types of abuse and mistreatment. So they're similar to what you would see in family violence generally. The difference here is that most of the clients that come to Seniors Rights Victoria are over 70 years of age. So the thing to think about is, you know, if someone was over 70 years of age and being physically abused, for example, the impact for them would be quite serious compared to someone who might sustain the same injury if they were, say, 40 years of age. And the ability for people over 70 years of age to recover from something like that takes a lot longer. So that's the way to think about it. And so what you're seeing in this table is, you see in the first column is the different types of abuse and mistreatment. The second column, what they relate to. And then the final column is some examples of that. And what I try and do in the examples is I try and demonstrate or indicate that not all abuse and mistreatment is as extreme as what you would see in the media. So, for example, in the media, what you're going to see is quite serious elder abuse. And the typical example is, you know, someone has been assigned to care for someone, care for a family member, or agreed to care for a family member who is older, and they're not providing that care, and the person is in serious neglect, and they might have died in squalid circumstances with no medical attention, no hygiene, no proper food, that sort of thing. They are a small percentage of the abuse and mistreatment we see. What we see is a lot more subtle than that. So, you know, one of the examples that, you know, occurs in a lot of families is a family member coming along to an older family member and saying, can I borrow $50? And usually that's on a verbal arrangement. So, you know, you loan the $50 and the expectation is that it will be paid back. And it's not. And the person might come again and borrow more money, and that's not paid back neither. And the older person is in a bit of a quandary about what they can do about that, because they don't want to deprive their adult son or daughter or their grandchildren, but at the same time they're going without. So that's a form of mistreatment or abuse that can happen very easily in families. So it's important to think of it as a continuum from very subtle, minor through to very extreme. The thing that's common in all of this is that it actually, you know, the person who's experiencing this will have some degree of trauma as a result of it. They will feel that there's been a betrayal of trust by the family member. All right. Now we're going to, just to get this a little bit more active, I've had a look at your website and what you do. And so what I've done is I've devised a case study, and we're going to have a bit of a discussion about this. So I'm going to give you a bit of a profile of a person who is being abused, and then we'll have a discussion after it. So this is Harry. Harry is 79 years old and has metastatic bowel cancer. He was referred to a community palliative care service for ongoing support and palliative care 6 months ago. Harry and his wife, Mary, have stated very clearly that he wants to die at home. Harry has one daughter, Vesna, from a previous marriage. Harry's first wife died some years ago, and since Harry remarried, Vesna has had a fractious relationship with her father and Mary. Harry and his wife have access to after-hours telephone support, after-hours home visits as required, and written resources. And, you know, all members of the palliative care team are involved with Harry's health. Harry's been having increased pain lately, some breathlessness, and he and his wife, Mary, are becoming quite anxious. Now, put yourself in the place of a volunteer, because this next bit relates to that. When a volunteer from the palliative care service arrives at Harry's home, Vesna is at the house arguing with Mary outside Harry's bedroom. Vesna has been visiting Harry during the week, and each time she visits, she tries to get Harry to sign a form. The financial enduring power of attorney form is to appoint Vesna as Harry's financial attorney. While Harry is still cognizant, he is often hazy and confused as a result of his illness and medications. When you arrive and speak with Harry, he tells you that he doesn't want Vesna to have control over his finances, property, or assets. Vesna then stomps into the bedroom, waving the form about and saying that to Harry that he has to sign the form because Vesna is blood family and is entitled to manage her father's financial affairs. Harry becomes visibly upset and distressed. Mary tells Vesna to leave the house, and she does. And Mary and Harry apologise to the volunteer for causing an embarrassment. Okay, so we might take people off mute for this. I might actually just stop sharing the screen. Oh, no, I have to leave the screen on, sorry, because I have some questions. All right. Actually, I will stop sharing the screen because you don't need to see the questions. I can actually ask them. Okay. All right. So what observations can you make about Vesna's role in this situation? Anybody?
Using bullying tactics.
She's using bullying tactics, yep. Anything else?
Yeah. Emotional.
Can you speak up a bit, Jen?
The wife. I think she's accurate, Amy. Yeah.
I don't know who that's talking, but we can hardly get you. All right. Any other types of observations you've made?
Lisa, go for it.
Just saying there's some emotional abuse there because she's talking about blood relations as opposed to, yeah.
Yeah, so she's using that emotional connection, which is what a lot of people do in abuse and mistreatment type situations, to exploit the relationship for her own purposes. Good. Okay.
Jane?
Anything else?
You also said that Harry at times is confused. So will it actually be a legal document anyway?
Yes.
You know, his mental capacity has to be established. Also, don't you need to have a witness when you have a enduring power of attorney signed? So just because he signs there, that may not be legal anyway.
Yes, that's right. That's right. Okay. What else? What other observations can you make?
I think
Mary seemed. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say, with the bullying, there's also an element of physical threat there because she was pushing and shoving the paper.
Yeah. So she's being physically aggressive as well. And physical aggression doesn't always mean that you're hitting or punching someone. It can be things that are very, aggressive physically, like punching a wall or stomping into the bedroom and being very aggressive over the person, those sorts of things. Yeah.
That
Anything else?
Threatening behaviour. Yeah.
Threatening behaviour. That's right. That's the word I was trying to think of. Yep. Rena, is it?
Yes, Rena. Mary, where is she in this? She's just outside the door and feeling very uncomfortable, obviously, too.
Yes, she is. So she's there, and obviously she might be feeling very fearful as well as to what aggression, might occur as a result of Vesna's behaviour. Yeah. Anything else? All right.
Lee's got a question.
Yep.
I guess there's Mary's fear of losing any financial support. And I guess with so many marriages breaking down these days, the statistics are going to say that there's going to be more and more of this, of kids who don't want the parent, new partner, access money.
That's right. And so that might be in play as well. And that goes back to what we talked about before, in terms of ageism. People have the right to make their own choices. So if someone wants to, after their partner has died, remarry, then that's entirely their choice, regardless of what the children think. And they have the right to make that. So it always goes back to that right of the older person to make choices. All right, tell me what types of abuse are you noticing? So we said physical abuse. What other
Verbal.
types of, sorry?
Verbal?
Verbal. We said emotional abuse as well because of the family connection. MJA?
Oh, sorry. I think it ticks almost every box for abuse. We've got physical, emotional, there's threatening behaviour. It ticks them all of which are illegal.
Is this financial abuse as well?
Yes.
Is the financial abuse happening already, or is it likely to happen?
Likely to happen.
It's likely to happen. If he signs the form and she goes away and falsifies signatures for witnesses and stuff like that, there's likely that financial abuse will occur because she will have control over his finances, assets and property. So that's what we mean by being at risk. You know, there's some abuse that's quite apparent there, but there's some risk of further abuse occurring.
Yeah. It's also controlling and coercive behaviour.
Yeah, it is. It is very controlling and coercive as well. So Harry's given you some insight into his situation. So he has said to you as the volunteer, look, I don't want to sign this document. I don't want her to have control over my finances and whatever. What are you going to do?
I think I would stay out of it and report it back to Crystal or one of those people so they could take it a bit further.
Okay, good. What do other people think? So you're there and Harry's telling you this and you're thinking, all right, I need to stay out of this. What's the basic thing that you might do?
We need to settle Harry and his wife down, tell them that this is not okay behaviour, and that if the Vesna hadn't left, I would have been asking her to leave, that I had an appointment and I needed to be there for the appointment. But the fact that she's left, I think it's important to let the couple know that this is not okay behaviour, and that we would then report it to Crystal and to the family support workers. All
right. So think about the language you're using. So one of the things, that's good response, by the way. Think about the language you're using. When you talk to people about reporting it, the thing they're going to immediately respond to is that word reporting and what that means for them and what it possibly means for Vesna. So one of the things you might think about is softening the language. So talking about, I need to advise Crystal and whoever, or I need to inform them. And so that it's not seen as that if you report it, there's going to be police barging in the front door, you know, with batons raised, because that's the you know, thing that most people will think of when you talk about reporting it. Yeah. All right. Any other comments that you want to make about this particular case study?
Probably an even softer way. Would be to say, I'm just going to let Crystal and the family support worker, whoever, Crystal and Angela, know. Yeah. So if you need any help with this, they're going to be there to help you. That's a lovely soft way. It also opens the door then for the social worker to come back in and have a conversation about it. Yeah, and it might be that, you know, initially you just listen to Harry. You know, you might not have a response for him, but by just listening, what you're saying implicitly is that what he's talking about is valid. A lot of people will, when they hear these sorts of situations being disclosed to them by someone, will put the barriers up, and they might start talking about, you know, what Melburnians are mostly good at talking about is the change in weather. And what that says to someone, if you do that, it says, well, I don't want to listen to this, but it implies that if I don't want to listen to it, no one wants to listen to it. So it doesn't give the person any avenue to then talk about it with anybody else. Whereas if you take the approach that Crystal has talked about, what you're doing is you may not be able to do anything, but at least you're opening it up for further discussion. Lee, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I thought the scenario was going to take us down a much more challenging route. And
okay.
That would be that Vesna not only is aggressive towards Harry, but actually to you, the volunteer. And I want you to volunteer, want you to witness this statement, which then is much more challenging for us as a volunteer to say, look, I'm not comfortable to do this. I'm not sure this is appropriate at this moment in time. And I can well imagine that scenario unfolding.
Yeah, okay. Well, what would people do in that situation if Vesna sort of, Harry succumbed to Vesna's demands? He said, all right, I'll sign it. And she turned to you and said, I want you to witness it.
I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
No?
No.
Well, in our role as volunteers, we're actually not allowed. Policy doesn't allow us to play that role anyway. So we'd be going against EPC policy. So that gives us an out when talking.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. All right. Crystal, did you have you had your thumb up.
No, I'm just going spot on, Anna. That's it. That's your outline. It's in policy. No staff or volunteers can sign any documents.
All right. Thanks for doing that, Lee, because it's hard for me to actually judge what what level to pitch this. But that's a good question because she is going to be there with the form and she's going to want people to sign it. And we have had situations where people have a son or daughter has turned up with the document, wanted mum or dad to sign it when they're not, when they are ill. And in one instance, there was a nurse in a hospital who decided that she would witness it for the daughter, and it gave the daughter essentially, power over the woman's finances, property and assets, and she acted on it straight away. So, it's important to recognise that, you're not to witness it, given the policy of the APC. And also, there are now more stringent requirements in place in terms of witnessing these documents as well.
Could I just ask a question there, Gary? When the nurse signs it while she's on duty in the hospital, is there a legal out for the family to invalidate that witnessing because she should never have done it in the first place?
Yeah, and that's what we argued when it went to the tribunal. But essentially what happened was the tribunal threw it out because revoked the enduring power of attorney because the daughter had, one, been estranged from her mother for 10 years, and secondly, she had got her mother to sign the document under duress. Right. So her mother had had a stroke, and there was an argument put that she had got her to sign it under duress, and therefore it wasn't valid. I don't know whether the tribunal member made comment about the nurse witnessing it and whether the hospital was notified. But yeah, that's what happened. Yeah. Okay. All right. That's great. All right. Let's move on.
Gary, I can see Pam's got a question for you.
Yeah.
Pam, you're just on mute.
Oh,
there you go.
I was just wondering, as far as the witness goes, are you just witnessing Vesna's signature, or because she could just go to her local pharmacy and get the pharmacy?
Yeah, she could. No, you're witnessing Harry's signature.
Oh, okay.
He has to sign the document, and that's what she was trying to get him to do. And so, in enduring powers of attorney now and the medical decision-making appointment, one of the witnesses has to be either a doctor, police officer, justice of the peace, or someone like that. So it has to be someone independent. The other person can't be anybody who's being appointed, and they can't be a member of the person's family. They can be someone who's known to the person, so it might be a family friend, and they would be the second witness. So it's very hard to do what Vesna was attempting to do and have it validated. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
Well, if Vesna could,
so she couldn't just go to her local doctor and
no, because she'd have to have Harry there. He has to sign the power away to her. So he has to nominate her as the attorney, and he has to sign that. And so if he's not capable of signing for whatever reason, he's hazy or, you know, he's unwell or whatever, then he can't sign it. It's not a valid authority. Yeah? Okay. All right.
Christine, you
Shall
had
we
a
move on?
question? One last one and then
another
we'll move on. Yep, Christine.
Yeah, that's good. That's what this is designed for, is to get you asking questions. Yep.
No, mine's already been answered. It's okay.
Okay, Christine, great. Thanks. All right, I'm going to try and share the screen again. Oh, I better get the PowerPoint up. Where is it? Okay, can you all see that?
Yep.
Great. All right. All right. So just looking at some indicators and signs of, you know, how you might know that elder abuse is occurring. So one of the things I did in that particular case study was I made it fairly obvious. You know, here was someone being asked to sign a particular document against their will. But on occasions, the abuse and mistreatment may not be as easily identified. And so what you would have to look for are other indicators and signs that might lead to you considering that this is elder abuse. And so there's an overarching definition which says that sudden or unexplained inconsistencies in a person's lifestyle, health, financial affairs, or emotional state. Now, the thing is, that could describe anything on its own. It could describe that the person's got an infection, that the person has had a number of bills, for example, that have put financial stress on them. It could explain anything. So what we need to know when we're looking at indicators is there additional information that can help me determine whether this relates to elder abuse? So a typical example might be that someone who is pretty good at having food in the fridge and food in the pantry and, you know, and cooking meals and that, all of a sudden doesn't have food in the fridge and food in the pantry, has stopped cooking their own meals, is looking as though they're losing weight. Now, a person might be privy to the fact that that's what the change has been. However, that on its own doesn't say that it's elder abuse. And so what we would be looking for are circumstances that have occurred in the person's life for that change to occur. And one of the circumstances might be that an adult son or daughter has turned up each week or each fortnight when the older person is getting their pension payment, for example, taken them shopping, and instead of allowing the older person to do their shopping, what they've done is their own shopping, and so that the older person is only getting the bare minimum of food. And they're actually buying their shopping on the older person's pension. Now, you may not know all that in detail, but the circumstance which has changed is that that person has come into the older person's life and is now starting to take them shopping once a fortnight, whereas previously that wasn't occurring. So you would then have to ask, is this a sign that there's abuse and mistreatment occurring for this person? The other thing to say is that not everyone is going to come to you, in fact, hardly anyone really, is going to say that I'm experiencing elder abuse or mistreatment. Most people who come and talk to us don't do that. What they will do is they will say to us, my oldest daughter or my oldest son has started visiting me and taking me shopping and things are not okay. And there'll be a need to explore that a bit more. And so that's what we do at Seniors Rights Victoria. Now, in looking at this, what I considered is the particular context in which you're working. And then I asked Crystal what would be some of the requirements of you if you were to be suspect that abuse or mistreatment is occurring, or have it disclosed to you, as was the case with Harry. The first thing to say is that in Australia, all state and territory governments that have responsibility for this are taking a rights-based approach. What that means is that the older person, if they have capacity, have the right to self-determination, that we're obliged to provide them with information so that they can make an informed choice, and they have the right to make their own decisions. So what that means is there's very few circumstances in which you would impose on the older person a particular course of action without their agreement. And so when people come to Seniors Rights Victoria, you'll notice that what I said at the beginning was that we provide them with options of how the abuse and mistreatment might be addressed. What we do in providing those options is talk with them about what best fits their context, and they make a choice about that. They may not do it straight away. They may take a long time to do that. Some people can take, 6 months, 18 months or whatever. We don't have a time limit on when we're working with people when they must resolve it. So we will work through those sorts of things with them, and that's why we have social workers. Now, the response in the context of Eastern palliative care is that, we'll get to that in a moment, but at the very first, when we were talking about Harry, it might be that all you can do is just acknowledge and listen to what he's saying. Right? You may not be able to do anything. And in fact, what we saw was that the policy and procedures at Eastern Palliative Care indicates that, you're not to act on it. The other thing is not to cause the person more harm. So, by saying that you're going to telephone the police or whatever, might put the person in a much more stressed position. It might be that if you, respond to Vesna, that you might find that when you're not there, Vesna comes back and she becomes more abusive and more coercive and more aggressive. So it's important to ensure the person's safety at the very least. In your situation, what you would need is to alert the volunteer coordinator, and you would note it in your report after the visit and email, is it the volunteer coordinator, Crystal? They email? Yeah.
Yeah, they email us and the social worker. Yeah, that's normal practice.
Right. Okay. So do you want to say anything to this, Crystal, in terms of your particular response to this?
No, I think that's fairly clear, and the group knows that goes immediately. Guys, just so in case you may not realise, is that when you actually send us information, say like in this realm, often Nikki, Penn, myself, or Kate will actually get up off our chairs and go and find the social worker to alert them to make sure that the news has got to them immediately. And if they're not there, then we're bouncing that straight to their team leaders as well, and we'll always let you know what happened.
Yeah, because often what I hear, is that it's good to know that, because a lot of places, what I hear is that the workers or the volunteers make the report, but then they hear nothing about it, or they don't know what happens when the person gets that report. So I think it's good to know that that's the sort of thing that you're doing. All right. I wasn't going to spend a lot of time on this because we only have an hour and there's sort of a limited amount of information I can give you. But I did want to talk about it a little bit because I imagine that you would have clients that would fit into this particular realm or particular area. So there are 3 types of groups that we look at when we're talking about diversity and elder abuse. The first group I'll talk about are Aboriginal populations. So in Aboriginal populations, it's a very different culture to whitefella. And so family is defined more broadly. So the Family Violence Act takes that into account. So, family for Aboriginal families means cousins and aunts and uncles and all the rest of it. And there will be varying degrees of close and trusting relationships in that. The other thing is that for Aboriginal populations, the word elder doesn't relate to age. It relates to a person's standing in the family or in the community. So in some communities, what you might find, or families, you might find that an elder that a person has elder status, and they might be in their 30s. So what we talk about in Aboriginal populations when we're working with them, in consultation with them, is abuse of older people, which defines that what we're talking about here is people over 45 years of age in Indigenous communities. What we're seeing in Aboriginal communities and what we're being told is that grandparents are taking on a parenting role a lot more because of the high levels of incarceration and substance use in Aboriginal communities, which result in a child's parents not being able to look after them. And so the grandparents are being put into the position of parenting again. And what that means is that grandchildren might become abusive or start to mistreat their grandparent as they get into teenage years. The other thing is that can be exploited is in Aboriginal families, there's this norm that what comes into the family is shared in the family. Now, usually that's within the proviso that whoever is receiving whatever comes into the family looks after themselves first, and then it's shared in the family. That can be exploited in some ways by particular family members in arguing that it needs to be shared regardless of whether the older person's needs are being looked after or not. The other group we work with quite extensively in Victoria is culturally and linguistically diverse groups, because of the big population of people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds in Victoria over 60 years of age. The Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria has done a lot of work in this area. They have an elder abuse prevention officer with whom we work. And what we know is from the work that they've done and the work we've done in collaboration with them is that culture can have a big impact on a person, an older person, in terms of elder abuse. And they may find that, or older people from CALD populations may in fact not be as familiar of the support services available to them. And also because as people get older, research indicates that they usually drop the languages they've learnt and they retain the languages they were born with. And so what that might mean is they're relying on family to translate documents for them. And in some situations that will be exploited. And there might be increased social isolation because of language barriers. And the final population is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender and intersex populations. Not a lot of research in this area. What we do know is from the United States of America, where there has been some work done with these populations. And there are services targeting older members of this population group, is that they're less likely to disclose elder abuse because they don't want to draw attention to themselves. And that's as a result of the marginalisation and discrimination that they've experienced over the period that they've been alive. And so what that has meant is that they're not wanting to draw attention because they think they might experience that discrimination again. The other thing we know with that population is that they have smaller group networks of people to support them, and that the social isolation might be greater because of the perceived hostility towards members of that particular population. So when we're working with these populations, we take all those things into account. So where we might just deliver a straightforward education session to a group of seniors, if that group of seniors was a group of CALD seniors, we would do it a little bit differently in collaboration with the Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria. All right, that's the end of the presentation. I think we've got a few minutes for questions. What I'll do is just sum up. So one of the things that we talked about at the beginning was the increasing ageing population and how ageism discriminates and devalues and denies the rights of older people to live in safety and with dignity. Obviously, what we want to do is take a preventative measures to ensure that older people are well informed of their rights and are aware that they can assert those when required, and that that will help them to not experience elder abuse. And however, what we also know is that there are older people who, both men and women, who will be abused by family members and relatives, and that we want them to know that there is support available to them. It's free, and we don't do anything unless the older person agrees in the response to the elder abuse. And what we're working towards is rebuilding their confidence so that they can live with respect and dignity in the community. The other thing to say is, just before I finish, is that once we've resolved the case of elder abuse, we don't just stop contact with the person, what we will usually do is we'll stay in contact with the person for a period of time. It can be up to 3 months, but it might be a bit longer. And it might just be a regular contact once a fortnight to check in to see how they're going, just to make sure that the abuse hasn't reoccurred, and that they're feeling reasonably confident about the resolution and moving on with their life. So we're not just about working with them while the abuse is evident, we work with them beyond that as well. Okay, any questions?
How often does the elder abuse occur?
Sorry, Lynn, can you ask again? You're just bumping in and out.
Yes, it's coming and going this end too. How often does the elder abuse reoccur?
It's hard to say. We haven't got any data on that. And we don't, so usually what we try and do is resolve it in its totality. And so what that means is that we don't have repeat clients usually. However, there are circumstances where there might be repeat clients, and that might be sometime after the initial abuse and mistreatment and after it's been resolved. And so we have maybe stopped contact with them. They may have decided that they've taken enough action and they're going to leave it at that. So that would be the most typical circumstance. So, you know, one particular case I can recall, which we sometimes use in a case study, is parents who had an adult son living with them, and he was becoming quite physically aggressive towards them. He had moved in with them after his marriage had broken down, and he was becoming more violent. And our recommendation to them was to get an intervention order to have him removed from the premises. They were reluctant to do that because it was their adult son, and they thought that he would be homeless if they did that. So we went down a number of different paths with them to try and resolve the issue. In the end, we got part of the way. They were reasonably happy with that. He was still living with them. And they then came back to us 6 months later and said, he's become more aggressive. We need to go and get the intervention order. So it depends on the circumstance. It's hard to say what numbers would do that. But there are occasions when that happens. Any other questions or discussion?
Ian, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yes. My question is, what about the situation, say, pushing her to get money out of the grandparents?
So
can you ask that again, Ian?
The question I'm asking is, what happens if that daughter had a partner that come on the scene and he's the one that's putting the pressure on the daughter to get the money from the grandparents? That seems to be a lot of the cases where there's been situations where, you know, a new partner has come on the scene and they think, oh, the grandparents have got plenty of money, we can share that and have that from them.
Yeah. Our focus, Ian, is always with the older person who's being abused or mistreated. So we don't take into account who it is, except that we want to resolve the issue. So even if it's the son-in-law or grandson-in-law who's forcing the granddaughter or the daughter or whoever to try and get money out of the grandparents, our focus would be on how do we resolve that for the grandparents in a way that is agreeable to them. Invariably, what people will say is that they want to retain the relationship with the relative or the adult child who is actually perpetrating the abuse or the mistreatment in some way, which was the case for that couple whose adult son was living with them. They wanted to retain some relationship with him, but in the end recognized that there was no resolution without an intervention order. So what we try and do is work in a way which we can achieve that, making people aware that we may not be able to. And but our focus would be with the older person in resolving that. Not sure that that answers your question. we don't, I suppose, if I can just say that we don't work with perpetrators. There are some services in family violence that do work with perpetrators. We don't. The most we would do with a perpetrator is sometimes a parent will come to us and say, an older parent, and say, can you get help for my adult son or daughter because they've got a gambling problem or they're using drugs? We can give them information where they can go and get that help, but we actually don't facilitate that as such, because the focus is with the older person.
Sure. Thank you for that.
No worries.
Where do you mainly get your referrals from?
So we get about a half of the telephone calls that come in are from concerned friends, family, and others. So these will be people who know the older person and who know that they're being abused. And so they will be contacting us out of concern for that older person. So it's about half of the calls. The difficulty for us is that we have to work, and it's a frustration for the concerned other, that we have to work directly with the older person to get their version of events. Because we work within a human rights framework, we have to make sure that we're not acting in any way that would compromise their rights. So we need to speak with the older person at some point. But what we try and do is, with concerned others, we will try and work with them in a way where they can support them during, through the abuse or mistreatment, or possibly facilitate them contacting us directly by, if it's a close friend who lives apart from where the older person is, that they would take them to their place and they could contact us. So that's half the calls. A quarter of the calls come from agencies and organisations who are directly working with older people in some capacity. So they would contact us, and I forgot to talk about this in the seniors' rights section. They would contact us and we would provide advice to them. So we call that secondary consultations. They're free as well. And a quarter are the older person themselves who are being abused or at risk of abuse or mistreatment.
Gary, are there ever times when your organisation needs to call the police immediately? Yeah, not a lot, but there have been times where we have just thought that the older person's safety is at considerable risk, and we have decided to call the police and to act on behalf of the older person. Obviously, working within a human rights framework, we don't make those decisions lightly, but there have been instances where the older person has had someone living with them, the adult son or the adult daughter or relative, and they're becoming more and more aggressive, and it's becoming unsafe for us to visit the person, and we're becoming aware that that needs an intervention beyond what we can offer. Yeah.
So can I just ask Crystal, Linda?
Yeah, go for it, Linda.
If that happened to us when we were at a house and it got really out of hand, would we ring the police or would we ring you?
You'd leave the house straight away and ring us, and we'd get nurses we'd work out the plan for you.
Yeah, okay.
All right, I'm aware we're over time. If you have questions subsequent to this, telephone the helpline. They know the sessions that I deliver. And so don't think if you haven't asked a question today, you can't ask it in the future. You can, just telephone the helpline and they'll be happy to answer it. Thank you so much, Gary. That's been really informative for us. Thank you. And we really appreciate your time and your information and wisdom there. And volunteers, I'm going to do you another favour. I will enter your hours for today. So all is fine until we're post-COVID, and then it's back to you. Thanks, guys, for being with us. And thank you, Gary. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Crystal.
Thank you.